4 in the morning. A farmer in Guizhou province ties a cloth sack to his belt and begins climbing. 2,000 stone steps cut into a mountainside so steep that clouds pool in the valley below him like standing water. He will not come back down for 12 hours. Everything he is going to eat today is in that sack. There is no village up there, no market, no fire unless he builds one. If his food spoils in the heat, or gets crushed on the climb, or falls into a flooded paddy, he does not skip lunch. He risks passing out on a narrow cliff edge. And here is the part that should stop you cold. He has no plastic, no refrigeration, no preservatives made in a factory. Every single item in that sack was engineered from plants, animals, salt, and thyme. These were not recipes, they were survival technology. And today, we are breaking down 20 of them. Let's start with the most basic problem. Rice was life. It was the single highest calorie crop these farmers could grow, and it was the foundation of every meal they carried. But here is the thing about cooked rice. It is fragile. It mushes. It spoils. It falls apart. So the first challenge was deceptively simple. How do you carry cooked rice up a vertical mountain and still have something edible at noon? 1. The geometric survival block, zongzi. If you pack soft-cooked rice into a cloth bag and sling it over your shoulder, by the time you reach the top, you have a bag of warm paste. Useless. The solution was structural engineering at the dinner table. Farmers packed glutinous rice, the stickiest, most calorie-dense variety, into broad bamboo leaves and tied them into tight triangular bundles. That triangular shape is not decorative, it is load-bearing. You can stack a dozen of these at the bottom of a sack, and the ones on the bottom hold their form. But a zongzi was never just rice. Inside, farmers layered salted pork for fat, mung beans for slow-digesting protein, and chestnuts for sustained energy. Each triangle was a complete, self-contained fuel cell, balanced macronutrients sealed in biodegradable, antibacterial packaging. The bamboo leaf did more than hold the shape. Its natural waxy surface repelled moisture, and its tannins slowed bacterial growth. A well-made zongzi could last 2 to 3 days in summer heat without refrigeration. 2. The waterproof wrap. Lotus-leaf rice. Now picture the worksite. The farmer is knee-deep in a flooded rice terrace. His hands are caked in mud and organic fertilizer. If his food gets wet, it is ruined. If he touches it with dirty hands, he could be violently ill by nightfall. This is where the lotus leaf entered the equation. Long before modern material science gave us the term superhydrophobic surface, Chinese farmers had identified a leaf that water simply could not penetrate. The lotus leaf is covered in microscopic waxy structures that cause water to bead up and roll off, carrying dirt and bacteria with it. You could drop a lotus leaf-wrapped meal directly into a mud puddle, pick it up, and the food inside would be dry and clean. Farmers wrapped full portions of rice, salted pork, and preserved eggs inside these leaves. The leaf did triple duty: waterproof container, antibacterial lining, and flavoring agent. When hot rice was sealed inside, natural alkaloids from the leaf infused into the food, measurably slowing microbial growth. Laboratory analyses of lotus leaf compounds have shown broad antimicrobial activity, an effect these farmers understood through centuries of observation, long before anyone could explain the chemistry. 3. The field expedient cooker, bamboo tube rice. The zongzi and the lotus wrap assumed the farmer had time to cook rice before dawn. But what about the mornings when he didn't? What if the climb started before the fire was even lit? For deep mountain work, the solution was the bamboo tube. A farmer would cut a 30-centimeter section of fresh moso bamboo, pack it with raw rice and water, and plug both ends with leaves. The sealed tube was nearly indestructible. It could survive the climb, rattling around in a sack without leaking or cracking. When noon arrived, the farmer threw the entire tube directly into a fire. The moisture trapped in the fresh green bamboo wall converted to steam. The sealed chamber became a pressure cooker. 15 minutes later, he cracked it open to perfectly steamed rice, lightly scented by the bamboo. The tube was storage container, cooking vessel, and serving plate, all made from a plant growing within arm's reach, all completely disposable. 3 items, 3 solutions to the same problem, and not one of them required a single material that could not be found within walking distance of the terrace. Rice keeps you alive, but rice alone cannot sustain a human body burning through 4,000 calories a day, hauling rocks, rebuilding terrace walls, and managing water flow on a 45-degree slope. The next problem was protein, and getting it to survive heat, humidity, and days without refrigeration. 4. Smoked rice paddy carp. The terraced rice paddy was not just a farm, it was a biological machine. Every spring, farmers released carp fingerlings into the flooded fields. The fish ate mosquito larvae and weeds. Their waste fertilized the rice. When autumn came and the water was drained for harvest, fat, mature carp was scooped directly out of the mud. To turn this fresh fish into a portable ration, farmers smoked the carp over slow pine fires. The smoking process deposited phenolic compounds onto the flesh and drastically lowered its water activity, meaning bacteria could no longer find enough moisture to survive. The result was a lightweight, omega-3-rich jerky that could travel in a belt pouch for days. It was protein that had been raised, harvested, and preserved within the same square kilometre of terraced hillside. 5. Lactic acid preserved duck. The Dong ethnic group of southern China developed a preservation method that sounds alarming but is biochemically precise. They packed raw duck meat into ceramic crocks with glutinous rice and heavy salt, then sealed the vessel airtight. Over weeks and months, the mixture underwent aggressive lactic acid fermentation. The same process that turns milk into yogurt transformed raw poultry into a shelf-stable, sour-flavored protein. Modern tests of traditionally fermented Dong duck show pH levels dropping to around 4.0, an environment so acidic that dangerous pathogens, including the bacteria responsible for botulism, simply cannot survive. This sour duck required no further cooking. A farmer could carry it in the brutal midday heat and eat it straight from the wrapping. The acid did the work that fire normally does. It made raw meat safe. 6. Cured rafter pork. When the temperature dropped in the high-altitude winds, farmers needed something else entirely. They needed pure, slow-burning fat. They took thick slabs of pork belly, rubbed them with coarse salt and numbing Sichuan peppercorns, and hung them in the rafters directly above the family hearth. Day after day, the cooking fires below sent a constant stream of warm smoke upward. Over weeks and months, the meat cured into a dense, dark slab that could last for years. A farmer only needed a sliver the size of 2 fingers. Gram for gram, this rafter pork delivered more sustained energy than any plant-based ration in the sack. The fat burned slow, feeding muscles through hours of wall building and ditch digging in freezing wind. Between the fish, the duck, and the pork, these farmers had engineered 3 distinct protein preservation systems: smoke, acid, and salt cure. Each one exploited a different principle of microbiology. None of them required anything that could not be sourced from the farm itself. Now, this is the part most survival stories leave out. After 12 hours of hard labor in 30-degree heat, eating the same heavy starch and fat over and over, your brain starts to rebel. Your mouth goes dry. Chewing feels like a chore. Appetite shuts down, not because you are full, but because your body is bored. On the terraces, flavor was not a luxury. It was a tactical necessity. 7. Pickled mustard greens fermented in salt brine until intensely, almost painfully sour, these shredded greens took up almost no space. A farmer carried a fistful, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. The sharp acidity of the pickle served a precise physiological purpose. One bite flooded the mouth with saliva, which contains digestive enzymes that help break down heavy starches faster. It was a biochemical trigger, a tiny, sour jolt that reset the appetite and made the next mouthful of bland rice palatable again. Without it, a farmer risked undereating, which on a mountain meant dizziness, cramping, and potentially fatal mistakes. 8. Fermented tofu. Every inch of the terrace system was utilized. On the narrow, dry ridges between the flooded paddies, farmers planted soybeans. The beans fixed nitrogen into the soil, feeding the next rice crop, and provided a crucial secondary harvest. Those soybeans were pressed into tofu, then fermented into pungent, crumbly cubes. The fermentation broke down the soy proteins into free amino acids, creating an intense umami flavor. A single cube, no bigger than a thumb, could make an entire bowl of plain rice taste rich and satisfying. It also delivered B vitamins that are normally only abundant in meat. The pickled greens reset the palate. The fermented tofu made bland food exciting. Together, they solved a problem that modern military ration designers still struggle with: how to keep a human being eating enough when every meal tastes the same. Not every farmer could afford pork or duck. For the poorest laborers, the most effective survival items cost nothing at all. They were simply picked up along the trail. 9. Canal snails. Freshwater snails thrived in the irrigation channels that fed the terraces. A farmer did not even need to pack these from home. On the way up the mountain, he simply plucked them out of the canals. Free, living protein, already waiting. Preparation was minimal. Clip the pointed tip off the shell to break the vacuum, boil them in seasoned water if a fire was available, or carry them live and cook them at the worksite. You sucked the meat directly from the shell. Zero packaging, zero carrying weight, instant nutrition. 10. Dried shrimp and crabs. Bamboo traps set in shallow canals overnight would catch handfuls of tiny shrimp and freshwater crabs by morning. These were sun-dried until completely dehydrated and crunchy, then carried loose in a cloth pouch. Because you ate them whole, shell, legs and all, they delivered a massive hit of calcium and phosphorus. For a laborer whose skeleton was absorbing the constant shock of hauling stone and swinging iron tools, this was not a snack. It was structural maintenance for his own bones. 11. Ridge-grown soybeans. We already met soybeans in their fermented tofu form, but before fermentation, they served a more immediate purpose. Roasted or boiled, whole soybeans were one of the densest plant-based protein sources available. A handful, tossed into a pouch alongside the dried shrimp, gave the poorest farmer a surprisingly complete amino acid profile. Animal protein from the canals, plant protein from the ridges, both foraged from the terrace system itself. The pattern is unmistakable. The canal, the ridge, the paddy, every element of the landscape was a food source. Nothing was single-purpose. We are halfway through this list, and it is worth pausing to notice something. Not a single item so far required anything imported. The bamboo leaf, the lotus leaf, the carp, the snails, the soybeans, the salt, all of it grew, swam, or crystallized within sight of the terraces. The rice fed the farmer. The farmer maintained the terraces. The terraces grew the rice. And the packaging, the bamboo, the lotus, grew in the water that irrigated the whole system. This was not just farming, it was a closed-loop survival ecosystem perfected over centuries, in which the lunch sack and the landscape were the same thing. The next 10 items push deeper into that system, into medicine, hydration, and the outer edge of what these farmers were willing to put in their mouths to stay alive. 12 hours of labor on a 45-degree slope does not just burn calories. It destroys joints, shreds muscles, and wrecks the gut. On a mountain with no doctor, the food had to double as the pharmacy. 12. The morning fuel, Dong oil tea. Before the climb even began, Dong farmers drank something that would make a modern barista flinch. They fried raw tea leaves in hot animal fat with crushed ginger and salt, then hit the mixture with boiling water. Into this dark, bitter, caffeinated broth, they stirred puffed rice, fried peanuts, and sometimes slices of pork liver. This was not a beverage. It was a high-fat, high-protein, heavily caffeinated emulsion designed to deliver an immediate spike in alertness from the tea, followed by hours of sustained energy from the fats and proteins. It was a pre-workout meal centuries before the concept existed, and it solved a problem that every manual laborer in history has faced: how to hit peak output at dawn. 13. Anti-inflammatory rice cakes with wild beetle leaf. By midday, the joints were screaming. Wrists, knees, and lower back, all punished by the repetitive impact of swinging a heavy iron hoe into compacted earth. Farmers from the southern coastal regions brought a specific remedy. They pounded glutinous rice with beef and wild beetle leaves into dense, chewy cakes. The beetle leaf is well documented in traditional pharmacology for its anti-inflammatory and analgesic properties. That peppery, herbaceous bite was not just flavor, it was a preemptive strike against the swelling and stiffness that could cripple a farmer by afternoon. 14. Fermented bamboo shoots. Days of eating nothing but dense starch, cured meat, and animal fat will shut down a digestive system. These farmers knew it, and they carried the antidote. Raw bamboo shoots are fibrous to the point of being nearly indigestible, but submerged in saltwater brine and left to ferment, the tough fibers soften. What remains is a tender, crunchy vegetable loaded with probiotics and dietary fiber. Carried in small sealed jars, these fermented shoots acted as a reset button for the gut. The pungent, aggressive aroma, a small price to pay for a functioning digestive tract. 15. Highland fermented milk. In some highland regions across southern and Southeast Asia, farmers carried fermented buffalo milk, stored in bamboo tubes capped with banana leaves. The lactic acid bacteria naturally present on the bamboo's inner surface would spontaneously ferment the milk over a day or two, producing a thick, tangy curd packed with probiotics. This was a portable gut health supplement in a bamboo tube. It settled the stomach, fought off harmful bacteria ingested from working in dirty water, and provided a dense source of calcium and protein. The technique is well documented in highland cultures across the region, and its presence on the terraces speaks to the wide network of knowledge these farming communities shared. 16. Bamboo vinegar. When farmers burned bamboo to make charcoal, they captured the dark, acidic condensation that dripped from the smoke. This liquid, bamboo vinegar, is rich in acetic acid and phenolic compounds. It was not a food, it was a field hygiene tool. A few drops on the hands before eating served as an organic disinfectant. A light sprinkle over rice killed fungal spores. In a working environment where your hands were perpetually covered in mud, animal waste and canal water, this acidic liquid was the difference between a productive day and a bout of dysentery. It is 3 in the afternoon. The sun is directly overhead. The humidity is suffocating. A farmer on a high terrace is sweating out water, salt, and minerals faster than he can replace them. Everything left in the sack was designed for this moment, the brutal last hours when the body starts to fail. 17. Rice water. They never drank plain water. Plain water hydrates, but it does not fuel. Instead, farmers filled dried gourd canteens with the cloudy, starchy liquid left over from boiling the morning rice. This water is packed with dissolved complex carbohydrates and B vitamins. It absorbs into the bloodstream rapidly, delivering a steady stream of low-level energy without the crash of simple sugars. Modern sports science spends enormous sums engineering carbohydrate electrolyte drinks. These farmers were carrying a starch suspension hydration system in a hollowed-out gourd, and it solved the same problem: how to prevent the catastrophic energy crash that hits when glycogen stores run empty. 18. Tuber skin rations. In a world where nothing was wasted, the peels of potatoes, taro, and wild tubers were never discarded. They were dried and baked into dense grain cakes. Modern nutritional science tells us that the skin of a tuber concentrates the highest levels of potassium, magnesium, and antioxidants. By baking these skins into their field rations, farmers were, whether they understood the chemistry or not, replacing the exact micronutrients they were sweating into the soil every hour. It was waste stream nutrition, and it was remarkably effective. 19. 9 roasted bamboo salt. When a farmer's legs cramped on a narrow stone step 1,000 meters above the valley floor, it was not an inconvenience. It was a life-threatening emergency. To combat this, communities along the terraces engineered a specialized salt. They packed sea salt into hollow bamboo tubes, sealed them with yellow clay, and roasted them in a pine wood furnace. Then they did it again, and again, up to 9 times. Each cycle of extreme heat caused the salt to absorb trace minerals from the bamboo and clay, shifting its chemical composition toward a more alkaline profile. A pinch of this processed salt, dissolved in water, helped counteract the lactic acid buildup in overworked muscles, easing cramps faster than ordinary table salt. 20. Chong cha, the last resort. We have saved the most extreme item for last, because you need to hear everything that came before it to understand why a farmer would ever put this in his mouth. If a farmer was severely ill, gut-wrenching diarrhea from contaminated water, the early tremors of heat stroke, a fever that would not break, he reached for a tiny pouch of small, dark, fragrant grains called chong cha. He steeped them in hot water and drank the brew like a strong tea. Chong cha is the processed excrement of specific moth larvae. Before you recoil, the larvae fed exclusively on carefully selected medicinal mountain leaves. Their digestive tracts broke down compounds that are toxic or indigestible to humans and concentrated the beneficial nutrients into a dense aromatic residue. Steeping that residue produced a tea that, according to centuries of documented use, stopped diarrhea, settled fevers, and relieved stomach pain. It is bioprocessing. The insect did the chemical refinement that the human gut could not. And when the alternative was collapsing from dehydration on a cliff edge, no farmer cared about the source. It is dusk. The light is draining out of the valley. Our farmer begins the long walk down those 2,000 stone steps, the cloth sack on his belt now empty. The lotus leaf that wrapped his rice is already decomposing in the paddy mud, feeding the soil. The bamboo tube he cooked his lunch in is charcoal in a dead fire. The snail shells are scattered on a terrace wall. Nothing he carried up that mountain this morning will still exist by tomorrow. Every wrapper, every container, every scrap of packaging came from the landscape, was used once, and went back into it. The terraces fed the farmer maintained the terraces, and the cycle continued, season after season, for over 1,000 years. 20 meals, 20 engineering solutions, all built from salt, time, observation, and a mountain that gave back exactly as much as was put into it. The terraces are still standing, so are the recipes. If you want to see what fueled the caravans on the Silk Road itself, the meals that survived months crossing deserts and mountain passes, that video is coming next. Subscribe to Silk Road Annals so you do not miss it.